I am not someplace that I can talk super loud, so let me know if you can hear me. I have been having some tech difficulties, which is why this video is vertical instead of horizontal. And who knows how long it would have taken me to figure out how to solve this tech difficulty. So instead of doing that and coming on even later, I decided just to go live. So please forgive our imperfect situation. Happy Tuesday. I hope everybody has had a great day. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm trying to look at my computer because part of our tech difficulties have me over here streaming from my phone, and I'm trying to see because I don't know if I can see comments here. So I'm trying to see if there's anybody in the comments saying, "Oh no, we can't hear you." So yeah, that's how my Tuesday's been going. Hopefully yours has been doing better. I'm glad those of you who have joined me live, despite the delay, despite the technical difficulties, thank you for joining me. I guess we'll go ahead and get started because I am incredibly tired. Today is a travel day for me. I had to make a quick, very quick, short trip full of lots of things, lots of not fun things. This is not a fun trip. This is a trip to handle business like a grown up, which isn't my most fun kind of travel. But yeah, so I am low-key pretty tired. But I still want to come on here and talk to y'all live today. So thank you for joining me. And if you are new, welcome to the Picky Girl Nation and welcome to my channel, Picky Girl Travels the World. It is me. I am she. I am the Picky Girl. My name is Adelia Aborishade. And I like to travel, and I also live abroad. I've been abroad for 8 years. Last week made 8 years. And I talk about my travels, I talk about how to travel, I talk about living abroad, and I also talk about money on this channel. Why do I talk about money? Because I am a financial educator. I am a very strong and adamant believer that you gotta, what is it they say? You gotta tell your money what to do, or your money's gonna tell you where it's been. You've gotta tell it where to go. And so that's what I do. I help people do that. I am also co-host of Reclaim the Retreat. So if in any way that you are trying to change your life, you're trying to travel more, you're trying to move abroad, you're trying to get your money together, you need a break or retreat, I got you covered. But so that's me. That's what I do here on this channel, and thank you for joining me. And tonight, because it's a travel day, I thought we ought to talk about a travel topic, and in particular, traveling better. And I don't necessarily mean traveling more luxuriously, although I'm not mad at that. Treat yourself. But I'm thinking more about how we move through the world. If you're like me and you've been watching the Olympics, that gets you thinking about different countries, different locations, different places. I don't know if y'all caught the opening ceremonies for the Olympics. Because I live in Mexico City, I watched it on a Mexican channel. So all of the commentary was in Spanish, and I didn't have kind of like any kind of cheat sheet. I didn't have any, I could pick out a word here and there that the broadcasters were saying, but I imagine for those of you that were watching on an English language channel that you were probably getting some explanations about who the performers were and their significance to France or to Paris and that sort of thing. I didn't have any of that. So I was just watching it and trying to interpret it myself as someone who has traveled to more than 60 countries, almost, I don't know, around 60 different countries. And so that got me thinking about, like how we move through the world. I saw some stories about athletes who had difficulties getting visas to travel. Those of us with U.S. passports have a lot of, what do you call it, travel privilege because we can go to so many countries visa free. So we often don't think about travel quite in the same way that a lot of other folks do, because we've got a lot of privilege there. We can kind of get up and go most places. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight, like how you can be a better traveler. Be a more conscious traveler. That is really this part of my life, is about intention. And so that's not just about, because I've talked about being intentional. Last week, I had Ivana Robinson on and talking about like joy is a choice and being intentional in your life. You know, I also believe there has to be some intentionality when it comes to planning our travels and how we travel. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. You know, being a better traveler, being a better tourist, being somebody who doesn't add to a country's problems or struggles, you know, being more like of a travel ally. I don't know if you've ever given that any thought. But like trying to be in solidarity with the folks who live in the places that we visit. I mentioned that I co-host Reclaim the Retreat, and that is kind of the foundation of how we choose countries in which to host our events, choose communities in which our events take place. We go places that we are invited, and we try to be conscious. Conscious and intentional in all of our choices. We want to, give back to the place and not just be extractive. I see a question here. What are some of the countries we can go to visa free? If we are U.S. passport holders, I believe we can go to 158 countries visa free. Let me Google that real quick. But I think it's 158. We can go most places. I can tell you one place we can't go without a visa, and that is Russia. When I was going back to China during the early days of the COVID pandemic, my flight to get back to China had been canceled, and the only way that I could get back sooner rather than months later was to fly the Russian airline Aeroflot, which all their flights go through Moscow. U.S. citizens cannot go to Russia without a visa unless you're transiting. But the vast majority of the world, people with U.S. passports can go, if not visa free, visa on arrival. Vietnam is another country we need a visa where it has to be applied for in advance. If you're thinking about visiting Brazil, I believe it is maybe April 5th, April 10th, 2025, U.S. citizens will need to apply for a visa again to visit Brazil. But we have a fairly strong passport. But if you're somebody who has a weaker passport, like I have a friend who on their passport they can only go to 57 countries visa free. All right. So, I think this is not going to be very long because I'm tired and I don't think there's a whole lot we got to talk about. But when you are planning your travels, something that you want to do is take into consideration what are the existing issues there. As you all know, I live in Mexico City, who it's a place that is experiencing a headline grabbing water crisis. It is a city that is suffering from poor infrastructure, drought, subsidence, you name it. We got major water problems in Mexico City. And a few months ago, Rashida Dow made a video encouraging people who were planning to come this summer to maybe rethink their travel plans because of our water shortage. Because there are people in Mexico City who do not have water. This is a question many of you have asked about, like for an update on, but things to consider is when you travel to a place, are there any current issues? And for example, in Mexico City, the water situation is an issue and will probably continue to be an issue, I'm going to guess, for the next few years, y'all. Rainy season has started, but the rain is hit or miss. There are still people in buildings having to buy water, people who don't have water. Something else to think about are natural disasters. If you were trying to get away this summer and you were thinking about going to parts of the Caribbean, like maybe Grenada, they got hit by Hurricane Beryl. They have not recovered. That is something to keep in mind because the airlines might be selling really, really cheap tickets to those places. But what is it like on the ground? Is you being there as a tourist? Because often, particularly for people from countries with really strong passports, we often think that other countries are happy to get our tourist money, and that some of us even think like, oh, they should be thanking me for coming there and spending my money. We might want to put that, we might want to think about that kind of vibe. But, going certain places in the Caribbean, while the airfare might be cheap right now, having tourists on the ground and trying to cater to them, is that going to hinder somebody's recovery from the previous storm? That's something to think about. Like in Oaxaca, Mexico, before rainy season started. I haven't been following it, so I don't know what the deal is right now. But before rainy season started, there were, because it was so dry, because it's an arid part of the country, there were a lot of forest fires. And the governor of the state of Oaxaca was even quoted as saying that if you come to Oaxaca, bring your own bucket, like to use in the shower, I assume. So natural disasters, ongoing crises are things to think about. You know, everybody wants to talk about gentrification. That's another hot button topic in Mexico City. That's something that comes up a lot. People ask about, like, where can I stay that's not too gentrified or what have you. First of all, I think many of us are misusing the term gentrification, because a lot of what I think is going on in Mexico City is not gentrification, but what it really is touristification. And I think those are two different things. And I think this is also the former geography teacher in me wanting people to use the proper vocabulary. You know, gentrification takes place when an advantaged group, economically advantaged group comes into an area, displaces local residents, because the area is economically depressed, prices are lower, their presence, the advantaged group, their presence drives up prices. And I know a lot of people think, oh, well, that's exactly what's happening in Mexico. That's exactly what's happening in Barcelona. Because I'm sure y'all have seen the news stories about the protest in Barcelona where they were yelling tourists go home, they were shooting people with water guns, all of that thing. And really, in those instances, I don't think that's gentrification. Because I think gentrification has to be done by people who live in that place. There's all this talk about, well, foreigners come here and they're willing to pay ridiculous rents, and that then drives up the price for locals. That's not how gentrification works. What that really is touristification, which I know it might sound like a semantics game or splitting hairs, but that's a different thing altogether. And I think that goes deeper than something as simple as there are more foreigners here. It's particularly, I see this in Mexico City, it is kind of a systematic thing where things are getting oriented toward tourists that shouldn't be. There have been several stories in the news about how the salsa in Mexico City is getting less spicy. Why? Because the foreigners are saying it can't handle the spice. And so, selling tacos is a business. Some taqueros or taquerias have taken to, making things milder to satisfy the clientele. And people are quick to yell, that's gentrification. No, that's touristification. And I think the causes of the two things are different, but both of those, both touristification and gentrification, are both things that you should consider when choosing a location. If it's an area where touristification is already taking place and it's doing it in such a way that the local folks are really feeling the pinch there, that might be a place that you might reconsider going. That's just something that you want to think about. Before I forget, I do want to thank Abroad Ability for the super chat. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So we talked about things to consider. Is there some kind of crisis going on in place? Was there a natural disaster that maybe people are trying to recover from? Things like touristification, gentrification that might just make things, it's something to consider, and it's something you want to give some thought to and be sensitive to, and not just show up and be like, I'm a tourist, I got money, y'all better be glad I'm spending it here. That is not the vibe, that is not the attitude that we want, because we want to be better travelers. We, I think we see this with the Olympics, and those of you who have traveled, that like the cross cultural takes place when people travel. Like that's the best part of travel. And if you come into a place and you ignore, these things that are going on, and you don't show any sympathy or empathy toward the folks being affected, like that, you can't have successful cultural exchange. It's hard to experience for everybody. Something else I think to think about is, are there indigenous folks? Are there local folks who have expressed desires for tourists not to come? And those of you in the US know that folks in Hawaii have been struggling with a variety of problems, pretty much kind of like all of these problems we've mentioned. And they have asked folks, they've been asking folks for years, like stop coming, because they have suffered environmental degradation, natural disasters. Think about the fires that came through, all of these things. And so as you are making your plans to travel, that is something you want to keep in mind before you get too far in your travel plans, is ask yourself, is this an area where and I'm specifically talking about the voices of the indigenous folks there, the local folks, that they have expressed some concerns, or there's a certain way they want people to visit their homeland, their area, their community. And then the last one we should consider, and I know people often look at this one as an inconvenience for them, and not about what there's a bug in here, not the underlying issue, is when you are planning your travels in a lot of places. Mexico is not one of them, but in a lot of other places, particularly in Europe, I know, possibly South America, but not Mexico. If there are strikes going on, a lot of unions will announce them like, hey, we are going to strike on these days. And often as travelers, we see that as an inconvenience rather than, hey, there is something those people are fighting for, and I should show solidarity to their movement and change, rearrange, try to avoid traveling there during that time, or travel there in such a way that I'm not crossing the picket line. Often when there are strikes, we think about the inconvenience to our travel plans. And tonight, I just want to plant the seed to maybe think about that differently. People don't go on strike for funsies. They're usually going on strike because it is a fundamental issue to their well-being and their ability to earn a living and feed themselves. So, I don't know. Y'all tell me what you think. Sorry, I had to take that big gulp of water, but it is hot and my throat is dry. Coming back up here to see if there are any questions. Yeah, I think one of the things that I always try to do as I travel is to remember that I am a guest wherever I go. And, I used to tell my kids about this, like, act like you got some home training, act like you've been somewhere. And also have some empathy for folks. I know coming up to the Olympics in Paris, there was an announcement that was it the airport workers were going to strike like the day before, or was it somebody was going to strike. I know there was a protest, a work stoppage of some of the dancers for the opening ceremonies because they were not being paid or treated properly. So those are things I think when you are planning your travel to consider. And that might mean you don't get to go a place that maybe you had your heart set on. And, I know for me, I would much rather sort of be in solidarity with folks than plow through so that I can have this perfect vacation that, I have built up in my head. I think that's a better way to be a traveler and to be more empathetic. So those are things I say, think about them when you are making your plans and be able to pivot and adjust. I think this is where a plug comes in for travel insurance. There are so many things, y'all. that are constantly reminding us of why we need travel insurance. Y'all know just last week, was it last week, when the whole IT shutdown thing? Because a lot of people, I've been reading some stuff, and a lot of people in the comments are like, "Oh, well, my airline had to cancel my flight because of the IT outage, blah blah blah, and they didn't provide me with hotel. They didn't provide me with food vouchers. They don't have to because that is something that was out of their control." But that's why having a travel insurance policy comes in handy, because depending on the nature of your policy, either they will reimburse you for the food and the hotel and things, alternate transportation you had to take because of that. Or if you've got a really good policy, they will provide you money and extend you the ability to go get those things. I'm just looking at the comments. Okay, Pamela Jones said, one of my students turned me onto the term called cultural humility. Term strikes me as germane when discussing how not to move as a colonizer energy when visiting and living abroad. I love that. I love that. I love that. I appreciate the sustainable travel perspective. We need to treat people and their cultures as cherished, not as disposable. 100%. And those of us from the global north, the west, whatever you want to call it, our cultures in our own countries often treat people and their culture as disposable, as a commodity. And it is up to us to kind of unlearn some of that and not bring that to the places that we are going. All right. Now, when you're planning your travel, there are a couple of things that I really think you should strive to avoid. One of them is, it's got several names, but I refer to it as like slum tourism, poverty tourism. They did this in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, where they would set up tours to go through like the more damaged areas, the poor neighborhoods. I think that's something that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. We shouldn't engage in activities while we're traveling that are exploitive, particularly for those of y'all that are a part of my community. As Black Americans, we have often been on the receiving end of that in our own country. And the last thing we should want to do is to perpetrate and promote that in other folks' countries. I'm trying to think of another example, like they do favela tours in Brazil. Now, I will add a little caveat here. Let's say you have a genuine interest in seeing how folks live, what their life is like. If you're going to do, let's say, I can't talk, favela tour, is there an organization run by folks in the favela that give you a tour? Because it's really important that if you're hearing somebody else's story, that you're hearing it from them and not the colonizer, the oppressor, whoever. So if it's a tour that's run by the folks in the neighborhood where they're sharing what life is like for them and they're doing, that's a different thing. But y'all know what I'm talking about, where it's folks who are not even connected to the community. They're coming in and kind of treating it like it's a zoo experience, interactive zoo experience. Like, no, that's not cool. Rebloom Room says, like the tour buses that take pale tourists to the Black churches in Harlem. Yeah, we don't want to be doing that. That's one, it's dehumanizing. this idea of like these people and their circumstances and they have to entertain me. And it's exploitive as well. I would add voluntourism to the list of things that I would try to stay away from. Often, folks go abroad, they want to give back to the community in some way, they want to be helpful. And voluntourism has a really kind of like sneaky way of like luring people in who have good intentions. But we have to be honest about volunteers often do more damage than they do good. And you think about it, you've got a 2 week vacation and you're like, oh, I'm in Cambodia, I want to volunteer. Now, flip that around and think about the organization that is using you. In 2 weeks, how much of a difference are you going to make? What skill set are you bringing? What is it that you can do? Because I'm not, I don't want anybody to take this as an attack on their desire to help. It's not that, but the reality is if it's a short-term commitment and you don't bring any special skills, how is that going to work? What good are you going to do? There are a lot of organizations that kind of feed on the desire of people who want to help and say, oh, you can come and work in this orphanage. All right, let's think about that. Here you are, some foreigner. You probably haven't gotten any kind of orientation or special training, any cultural orientation on how things work there. You've not gotten any training on how to work with children who've been through traumatic situations. And if you go and you do some volunteering, I don't know, you read some books or whatever, and then you're gone because this is the end of your vacation. I don't believe it can be good for children, let's say in an orphanage, to have these volunteers cycle in and out of their lives. So any organization that perpetuates that, to me, that's not a good thing. When I went to South Africa in, what was that, May, and we went to Johannesburg and we went to Soweto, the organization that we visited, it wasn't a school, and I can't recall the name right now, but it one of the things that the director was talking to us about was the fact that he's like, if you like what you're seeing here, don't just show, like we're not looking for volunteers, because he basically gave voice to all the things I was saying that, you know, if people just show up and be like, hey, I want to volunteer and help, it actually makes more work for them trying to make sure that person is safe. Do they have some place to live? Blah, blah, blah. That they did take volunteers, but it was a much more long-term sort of thing. They were vetted, they had some training, they, had special workshops, that sort of thing. Now, am I saying like don't do things like Peace Corps? No, I think that's different. Although development work has its own issues, which we're not going to get into today, but at least there is some training. It is a long-term assignment. It is not, I don't believe that those situations are as detrimental as something like voluntourism is, which those companies really are about trying to give people that quick dopamine hit versus, I believe, really making sustainable changes and improvements in communities. You know, you talk to anybody in that field of work, they'll tell you, you know what we need? Money. So instead of going with and seeking out a voluntourism company for your vacation in Kenya or whatever, find a legitimate organization and donate some money to them. That's what I would do. That's what I would do. Okay. I see your comment, Gina. We hadn't talked about the Smart Traveler program from the State Department in this video, but it is, I've talked about it in several videos. It is one of the apps that I think travelers need to use when they travel. Okay. So if we're trying to be better and not be extractive when we are traveling, and it may seem difficult to be able to move like that in the world because, capitalism is a thing, and a lot of folks don't mind profiting at the expense of other people. And so it might seem like, well, what am I supposed to do? I want to go out and want to see the world, but I don't want to harm people in the process of doing that. Because, there are some places that I simply will not, I cannot go because I've not found a way to do it where it is not disruptive, exploitive, or what have you. I've taken those places off of my list for now. And, hopefully I will get a chance to revisit and come back to them and possibly be able to go there in a way that makes me feel good. So, that's always an option, not to go somewhere versus being complicit with that place's exploitation. Another option would be, to, what's the word I want to use? To, you know, make an intentional effort to spend money with small businesses, woman-owned businesses, indigenous-owned businesses, local-owned businesses. When you go to a place, again, like I said, there's an area you want to take a tour of. Instead of just going automatically with Get Your Guide, or what's the other one? TripAdvisor or anything like that, do a little digging and see, can I find a locally owned, and when I say local, I mean local where the people who run it are based in that community. It takes more work, it takes more effort. I can tell you this from personal experience in my own individual travels, as well as when we are picking vendors for Reclaim the Retreat, because that is something that is important to me, that I want the money that I spend in a place to benefit the people in that place. And so making sure that I am spending money with people with a tie to the community. Like everybody talks about staying at Airbnbs, and like where does that fall in this idea of like traveling better and decolonizing travel and that sort of thing? It when you're looking at Airbnbs, I'm not saying you shouldn't stay in one, although there's some corporate practices at Airbnb that leave a lot to be desired, but Airbnb and other platforms like it are a way that locals who are struggling to make ends meet, that could be the thing that does it for them. Like in Barcelona, because of all of the backlash about tourism and over tourism and the impact of tourism and all of that, they have decided to outlaw, to ban Airbnbs. But it's going to be, I think, a year or two before it fully goes into effect. And they're wanting, because they realize that are some, people who are doing Airbnb arbitrage, who own hundreds of units and all of that. There are some local folks, individuals who are renting out the other side of their duplex or their apartment to earn income, and say they want to give them some time to be able to transition over. Like in New York City, if you're going to run an Airbnb, you You have to have a permit. In order to get the permit, it's got to be a place that you live in, not just some place you own that you're renting out. Think about like when Airbnb first started. That's what it used to be like. That that for the vast majority of my Airbnb stays is what I used to do was to get a room. I always wanted to have my own bathroom though, but get a room in somebody's house and they live there because that way they can make a little money. You can also save a little money on a place to stay. You're right, Marcia. It is sometimes hard to tell if something is locally owned. But like in Airbnb, when you see one that you like, click on who is listing it. How many other properties come up under their name? You know, that's a giveaway of if it's either somebody that's got, you know, multiple units or it's a corporate landlord or that sort of thing. That's what I would say about that. I would also, again, encourage us. I had a client the other day that did not like this suggestion, and as an introvert, I understand how hard it is to have other people in the space that you are occupying. But renting a room in an Airbnb versus renting the entire unit, that's a way you can help, you know, the person economically who has listed their place, but also, you know, and not like give greedy corporations more of your money if you can help it. But even as an introvert, like I have done that, and as long as I got my room and I have my own bathroom, it has worked for me. And as y'all know, I'm an introverted introvert. So it's I don't know. I guess that's all I'll say about it right now. Okay. So we talked about Airbnbs, avoiding companies who lease units, try to find individuals who are leasing a space in the homes that they occupy. Now, if you are very outgoing, because a lot of people ask this, like, oh, when we talk about traveling solo, and they're like, oh, but I'll be alone. If you rent a room in a place where the owner lives there, you are not alone. You have somebody local who speaks the language, who knows the places to go, knows the places to avoid, can make recommendations, can, you know, communicate, and you can ask things that actually you get a like a living resource. Is great. I would also say do a little homework. And I'm good for just showing up to a place and with no plans and wandering, but do a little homework about the place you're going to, a little research. You know, I would try on YouTube. I know a lot of y'all are watching a YouTube video right now. I know a lot of you like to watch YouTube videos about the place you're going. One thing that I would challenge you to do is to try to find local creators, YouTubers who are based in the place that you are going. Yes, I realize that there might be a language thing, but let me tell you, I've learned so much about like how people are really living. What are the like area situations I might want to avoid, or like what are the current issues and topics of a place by watching YouTube videos by the creators who live in that place. YouTube does have the AI generated closed captioning, which isn't perfect, but you know, you can get a lot of what is happening through what you see on the screen and the intonations you hear people making. It's not 100% perfect, but that's one thing that I like to do so that I can really understand like what's going on in a place. I would also look for local news online, whether it's a news service, a newspaper. In a lot of places, newspapers are still a thing. And I would go to the newspaper's website, and as you're looking at articles, if you're using Google Chrome, Google will translate it. If you're using Microsoft Edge as your browser, it has a translation feature. I don't know about other browsers, but those I do know will translate the articles for you, so you can kind of read, like, this is what's going on, these are the issues. Because I've seen people visit places and have no concept, no idea of what's happening in that place. And then they're caught off guard, like, oh, I didn't know that there was going to be this massive transportation strike and now I'm stuck. Or I didn't know there was a water shortage and I'm at this Airbnb and I have no water, stuff like that. And then, like, do some old school. I would say, and this, I know I'm a teacher nerd, geography nerd here, but I'd even pull up CIA World Factbook and see what's going on in this place. What are their issues? What are things I might need to be concerned about? And then lastly, I would say seek out, as you're starting to plan travel, okay, and you're trying to get ideas, or you're trying to find tour companies that aren't shitty and exploitive. When you're doing your Googles, search for things like regenerative travel, sustainable travel, and when you find a company, ask questions. Ask questions about where are they based? Is it woman owned? Is it LGBT owned? Ask questions. One of the things that I learned in working with one of the travel coordinators that we use for Reclaim the Retreat, I learned about how the existing tourism travel guide structure in one of the locations, how it was really exploitive to the indigenous people there, and that the company we were working with was going out of its way to make sure, because the draw in that location was indigenous culture and indigenous people, yet they were not the people making the money off of all of the tours and off of the popularity of that region. And so when you are spending your hard-earned money to go on a tour, ask them, ask them questions about who they work with, why they work with them. Like, get a feel for how they do business. And if the way that they do business doesn't feel good, find somebody else. Find somebody else. Okay. And okay, here's my last little thing. Don't just pick a tour company, a accommodation or whatever, just because it is cheap. I understand we all want to save a buck here and there, particularly those of us from the United States. We have a culture that is obsessed with getting things, quote unquote, cheap. That's a very dangerous thing, because if something is really, really low priced, what is it they say? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I'm not talking about from the idea that, oh, they're going to scam you or something like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that if you can get a tour, like a 8 to 10 hour tour for $40, $50, you know who not getting paid? The people in the community that you are visiting on that tour. There's no way they can provide a tour to you that cheap and they are actually fairly compensating people. So I'm not saying pay inflated prices, but I am also saying don't let your desire for cheapness be the deciding factor. Because when something is cheap, when something is inexpensive, that really should not be. Because y'all know how much it costs to be alive. It ain't cheap. If something is super cheap that should not be, you know who's getting screwed over: the brown and the black folks and the women. Okay, so that goes back to, as I am choosing tour companies, excursions, experiences, I am asking questions about how they're compensating people. I want to know, do the people, like if they're taking me to a particular boutique or a particular winery or a particular region, because I'm going on a chocolate tour or a coffee tour or something like that, how are those people getting paid? Or are you getting part of their sales? I want to ask questions. I want to understand. I want to feel. I want the people who are providing the experience that I am going to see. I want to know that they are, not getting screwed over. And if something is super, super cheap, I can almost guarantee you those people are getting screwed over. And I don't want to screw folks over when I'm going on vacation. Okay. All right, I see several of y'all in the comments have stayed in owner occupied Airbnbs, and it was a great experience. I'm not sure, well, I think I do know why we've kind of gotten away from that, because in the beginning, that's what Airbnb was about. But then it kind of got co-opted, corrupted, whatever, and people saw it as a way to profit, which is not what it was initially designed for. But it turned out to be super profitable. So people got very much in the, oh, I'll just get my own space. And that's not really what that was about. So, all right. So that's all I got for y'all this evening. I'm trying to think. Is there a link in the description that y'all need to know about? Offhand, I cannot think of one. Oh, I know one thing I do want to tell you. Several people reached out asking about the next Get Started Investing Challenge. The date is set. It starts October, August 18th. Registration is open. I will reiterate that if you had been hoping to take the challenge, you kept saying you were going to do it, this is the time to do it. This is probably the last time that I will do it live, where I am there live doing the Zoom calls and all of that. So if you want to have access to me to ask questions about things, this would be the time to sign up for. I do believe there's a link to that in the description. If not, go to getstartedinvestingchallenge.com. But I think that's it. That's everything I got for y'all. If you are looking to travel in a sustainable way, you might want to check out Reclaim the Retreat. That is the retreat that I host with Ivana Robinson. I know I've made several mentions of it here, but I'm trying to pull up right now, because we just posted some of the numbers from the retreat we did in was the U.S. city in North Carolina back in April. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Give me a second, y'all. Okay, so our retreat, we raised $22,000 plus. Tourism dollars were reinvested in Black businesses in the community. 29,000 plus tourism dollars were reinvested in the community for people of color. Again, If you want to see a place, experience a place, but you don't want it to be extractive, Reclaim the Retreat might be an option for you. There is a link in the description, reclaimtheretreat.com. If y'all have got any other tips on how to be a better traveler, how folks can decolonize their travel experience, please drop those in the comments. And I will see y'all next Tuesday. Bye.